Tony D and Little Joan somewhere in the background. And this is Screenwriting Tips. Today I'm going to tell you how to write a screenplay about pirates. Yar! Smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Check out my books. Links in the description. Comedy Horror in South Jersey. It's the Pineys, books 1 through 12, available at Amazon.com. Don't forget, Kindle Unlimited is free. Pirates in book 6. Anyhow, how to write a pirate movie. Well, it's kind of a lot like, I think, writing a Western. It's a very specific genre to a very specific time period. And as I said in the Western video many moons ago, you have to kind of know the source material, right? You have to know the history. Just like the Wild West and the golden age of piracy is kind of a tiny window of time. You know, it only lasts about 20-ish years, and then it's gone. The times change, and then it's just basically gone, and it turns into something else. Doesn't mean there weren't pirates or gunfighters after those periods of times, but the golden age where you most likely are going to set your movie tends to be a very tiny window. So in the case of the golden age of piracy, it's like late 1600s, very late into like the 1720s, kind of. Maybe a little far past that. Depends. Because then things kind of end, and then 40 years later or so you get the Revolutionary War, and then it's not really pirates, at least in our neck of the woods. It's more the privateers going after the British Navy, who would be considered pirates from the point of view of the British Navy. Anyhow, you kind of got to know the history a little bit. You need to know the technology, the year you're doing it all in. Yeah, you can kind of glom over some of that and not really get too deep in it. I mean, you look at Pirates of the Caribbean, which is obviously the movie. In fact, I had to do about 4 different searches on the images just to get pictures that weren't Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp's Pirates of the Caribbean takes place in a fictional universe, so you got more leeway. However, you want it to be, I mean, like in a roundabout way, it's historically accurate. At least the first one. I don't think I saw any of the sequels, but the first one, you have the Royal Navy, and you have pirates, and it's a very romantic notion in the movie of what a pirate is. It's Johnny Depp's character is this free spirit who doesn't really want to hurt anybody. He just wants to be out on the ocean and free. And he doesn't want to, he might rob a few people, but he's not trying to hurt them. Whereas pirates hurt people. Yeah, I mean, they were the sort of gangster. They were halfway between a gangster and like a Wild West gunfighter. I mean, the Wild West gunfighters, most of the fights weren't necessarily criminal per se. It wasn't like they were like, oh, I'm going to kill a bunch of people and make a lot of money. The pirates are closer to that. But a lot of them would take the money and spare people if they could get the money easily. It was more about the money than it was murdering people for most of the pirates. So you're going to start your screenplay. You got to open it up in the time period and sort of set the stage for what kind of pirate movie you're going to have. Are you going to have a pirate movie that's more like Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's romantic, romanticized version of pirates, where it's just fun and light and nobody really gets hurt unless they deserve it? Or do you want a more realistic pirate movie where people are going to get killed? People are going to get killed and hurt, and it's going to be brutal, and a lot of scenes for the action scenes are going to be just brutal, and in the end, most pirates came to an untimely death, either in battle or they were caught and hung. Very few of them escaped. However, there are a handful that escaped, and retired quite wealthy, so you could focus on them depending on what you wanted to do. If I was going to pick a guy for a screenplay adaptation, I'd probably pick Black Bart. Um, Number one, he hasn't been done a lot in movies. I think he's been mentioned. I don't know if there's been a movie that's centered around Black Bart. They've had plenty of that centered around Blackbeard, Captain Kidd. Um, they had the TV show Our Flag Means Death that centered around Stede Bonnet, um, and a handful of others. But I don't think they really did Black Bart justice, because the rumor is he did escape to live a fine life with his money. And in the end, he got off his ship and bribed the local governor. It may have been like a Princess Bride sort of situation, that the name Black Bart was used by more than one pirate, and that it may have been multiple guys who became Black Bart for a while, made their money, and then retired and passed it on to their first mate to be the next Black Bart, till they finally shut it down. Sounds to me. But the first act, you would want to establish the time period, and you'd want to give the pirate protagonist a reason for what he's doing. Now, the sort of generic one they give in Pirates of the Caribbean, oh, it's all about freedom. I mean, some of that's in there. It was a harsh life. If you were in the British Navy, um, they were very oppressive. Some of the crews that mutiny had a lot of justification for their mutiny. Their captains were very harsh, and they finally snapped under the pressure. Not all of them were like that, but the ones you hear about, yes. So you could put your protagonist under a captain like that, very harsh reality, until finally he does something that crosses a line, kills, let's say, the cabin boy who was innocent, and then covers it up, or whatever, breaks his own rules. Usually hypocrisy is a good one to say, to undermine a character and say, oh, he's a piece of S, we're going to get rid of him. And then, your protagonist takes over the ship, becomes a pirate, because, that's, now that they've mutinied on the ship, there's really no choice, and that's how they're going to survive. It could also be true that it could be more of a Captain Kidd scenario. Captain Kidd was a privateer. He eventually got screwed, but it could be the sort of situation. A lot of times privateers and pirates sort of overlapped in a bad way. They're trying to be legal as a privateer, but you steal from the wrong ship and boom, you're a pirate. So it could be a situation like that. They're either set up or they made a mistake, and it's kind of like nobody's fault, but now they're pirates because they stole from the wrong ship. It actually belongs to the country they're supposed to protect, because privateers were only had letters of marque to go after certain ships. So you might be an English ship, your letter of marque would say, okay, we're at war with Spain and France, any of those ships you can take. You can't take from an English ship or a Portuguese ship or any of our allies. And then you raid a ship that appears to be, this was one of the stories I read, I forget which one, appears to be a Spanish ship, but it turns out it's really owned by a guy in England. Now you're in trouble. I think it was Captain Kidd, I don't remember. So something like that. And that's the first act, how the main character becomes a pirate, the times and how he becomes a pirate. Second act is the funnest act. You get to see all the pirating, right? And then you want some fun stuff of how they stole things, because that's always a fun, heist-like thing. It's low tech. So some of the ones I read about in New Jersey were the Patriots stealing ships from the British. In one particular instance, I forget the privateer, excuse me. They snuck on the ship, cut the lines, drifted the ship out to sea. The crew was asleep. There was only about 6 guys, and they took over the ship. At gunpoint, they had the ship. They were asleep. They drifted out to sea, and then they woke them up and said, "Ha, we run things now." Same sort of thing with other characters. You could do a very similar thing. There were guys who were pressed in the service. You know, you would want a character arc that was either dark or light. So, you know, in a light one like Jack Sparrow, Captain Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp's character, you'd want something like, well, he was only a pirate because maybe he got roped into it, he got pressed in the service, he didn't even want to be on a ship. Then he got pressed into being a pirate, he didn't want to be a pirate either. Now he's stuck being a pirate because now everybody's after him. And then his overall goal is to get off the ship with some amount of money and live his life. Maybe he's got a girl, maybe he's got dreams of, I don't know, opening a tavern, something like that. In a darker version, you could have a guy who at first is a great captain. And the pirates were pretty democratic on their ship for the time. And at first, he's about, you know, helping his downtrodden crew. And at first, they're stealing ships and they're having a great time. They're going in the ports in Barbados and spending their money, and they got girls and wine, and everything's going great. But as things progress, the weight of being in charge, being the captain, starts to wear upon the character. His crew just wants to party, and to do that, they need more money and they need more ships. At first, they don't want to kill anybody, but eventually they end up killing people because, you know, they're just pressed into doing it because they don't cooperate, they're attacked, they defend themselves, and then eventually he gets frustrated and starts attacking ships because he wants the money. Some of his crew are killed and he gets mad, and this happened with Stede Bonnet. He was so furious one time that I think it was a governor wouldn't have dinner with him because Stede considered himself a gentleman. He invited him onto the ship for a drink with no intention, allegedly no intention of kidnapping him. And then he got so mad when the governor turned down his request, I believe he bombed the governor's town with these cannons, which is something the pirates did. They could just run out of money and food and just go into town to raid for supplies, and then it turns into a bloodbath because the townspeople are like, well, we're starving too, we can't let you take our money and food, and they resist, and it ends up in a bloodbath. And then the final act, if it's a light sort of pirate movie, would be the character cleverly switches places with someone at the last minute and manages to get off the ship as the ship goes down, or everybody else is captured. You know, maybe the other guys on the ship were more murderous and he was a good guy, or perhaps the ship sinks and he survives with a little bit of money, and you know, whatever. Like, it's a happy ending. Maybe the whole crew just retires somewhere in the Barbados, and that's the end. Whereas the darker end would be, you know, sort of like the power corrupted him. The pirate captain becomes bloody and merciless, and he becomes just as bad as the British Navy ship captain that inspired him to become a pirate. Right? So, as always, you want to do your research. You want to know the era backward and forward. You want to be able to drop names of famous pirates and admiralty at that time. You want to know who the big players are: the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, to some extent the Americans, depending on the time period. You want to know places like Barbados because that was a base, and South Carolina and Cape May, New Jersey. You just want to do your research. And if you do your research and then write a screenplay with the 3 acts, with a protagonist who goes on a journey and changes in some way, maybe you could do a pirate version of Walter White. That would be interesting. Walter just gets darker and darker until he goes from Walter the White to Walter the Black. You know, and until finally he meets his final fate, whether that's a positive one or a negative one. There's a lot of material there. And like the Wild West, there's certain tropes to it that people want to see. They want to see the cannons. They want to see some sword fighting and pistol shooting kind of thing. You know, the flintlocks, not Wild West. They want to see, you know, the ocean and the ships sailing around, stuff like that. And then you want to add stuff that people maybe haven't seen, like the fights between, say, pirate ships and the towns. That's something that's not really... They did it in the Pirates of the Caribbean a little bit. I don't think they've done it in a way that really shows you what that was like. I mean, again, the Pirates of the Caribbean is more of a carnival ride than a movie. I like it. I love the first one, by the way, but it's... you know, it's very cartoony. Whereas, you know, you can do a more realistic one that would be more historically accurate and more gritty, you know, because it was like the Wild West for the pirates. But instead of hopping on your horse and galloping into the sunset, these guys got in their ship and they just sailed somewhere else. And they sailed all over the world. They went some pretty far distances. And then they sometimes ended up, you know, miscalculating, running out of food. That's why they got scurvy sometimes. So definitely do your research and definitely think about how the pirates how you would have done on a pirate ship. And don't go strictly by the Pirates of the Caribbean. There's a temptation to do that. Do the research yourself too. I mean, there's definitely some research in the Pirates of the Caribbean, but a lot of that is, you know, it's sort of like all the big stuff put in one movie. You want to, depending on the kind of movie you're doing, you want to kind of, you know, show us some new angle to that, you know, depending on whether you want it to be fun or realistic. I think a realistic pirate movie is long overdue. Anyhow, that's my thought on how to write a pirate movie. Yarg, get at it, mateys. Also know the jargon. You can look that up. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be at the Lower Township Cape May Library tomorrow, Monday, at 6 p.m. for my talk on how to hunt the Jersey Devil. I'll also be talking about pirates of New Jersey. Hope to see you then, and we'll see you tomorrow.